I don't know what it was about that Wednesday morning. Maybe the way the sunlight slanted just right through the kitchen blinds, making the coffee steam look like smoke from a slow-burning fuse. I had just gotten back from a meeting with a warehouse client. Nothing big. Just a routine catch-up on inventory software they still didn't understand. I loosened my tie, kicked off my shoes at the door, and went into the kitchen, craving nothing more than a cup of bitter, hot black coffee. Something to push the chill out of my spine. That's when I saw it. The little red dot blinking on my phone like a heartbeat. One voicemail. Just one. I tapped it absently while stirring in half a spoon of sugar. Hazel always said I liked my coffee sad. I almost didn't register her name until the voice kicked in. No greeting. No hesitation. Just Hazel, sharp and cold. You're out of the family business, Luca. Expect a call from our lawyer. Then came Brielle's voice, her sister. Smooth and cruel in that polished PR tone. This is final. The board has moved forward. We wish you the best. That was it. No explanation. No apology. Just that. I stood there for a long second, the coffee mug trembling in my grip. I set it down slowly on the marble counter, afraid that if I blinked too hard, the whole house would shift under my feet. My heart wasn't pounding. It was still, like the breath before a freefall. I replayed the message. I had to be missing something. Maybe it was a prank, a cruel inside joke I wasn't in on. But no, it was real. Hazel's voice, perfectly rehearsed. Brielle, finishing the blow like a second shooter. It felt less like a decision and more like an execution. They'd practiced this, sat somewhere with a notepad and rehearsed what to say and how to say it. They didn't even have the guts to call live. Just a message, left at 10:42 a.m., time-stamped like a bullet casing. I didn't scream. That's what surprised me. I didn't smash the mug or call her back and demand an explanation. I just stood there, staring at the black coffee cooling beside me until it matched the temperature of my chest. Hazel and I had been married for 8 years. Built a life, or so I thought. We had a routine, dinners every Friday, Sunday hikes in the fall, inside jokes about bad reality TV. We shared more than a home. We shared a company, a vision. Or at least I thought we did. Her family owned Mirabelle and Company, yes. But I had built my stake. I wasn't a hanger-on. I wasn't some pity hire married into the boardroom. I had sacrificed. And not just hours. I gave up weekends, holidays, entire chunks of myself, trying to keep the place running. And now, I was dismissed like an unpaid intern who overstayed his welcome. I stared out the kitchen window, watching leaves rustle in the wind. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower buzzed and a dog barked. The world didn't pause for heartbreak. It never did. My phone buzzed again. A follow-up text from Hazel? No. An ad for lawn fertilizer. Of course. I picked up my phone again. My fingers hovered over her contact. Hazel, my love. That's what it still said. I hadn't changed it since the honeymoon. My thumb hovered over the call icon. Then I switched to messages. My hands were steady, surprisingly so. I typed one word. Understood. That was all. No begging. No questions. No rage. Just a quiet acknowledgement of the bomb she'd dropped. I hit send. The message bubble turned blue. Read. Nothing more came. I stood there, still in my dress shirt, coffee forgotten, the voicemail still echoing like a slow poison. The air in the room felt heavier, thicker, like every molecule had turned against me. I sank into one of the kitchen stools and let the silence wrap itself around me. This house, this life, we built it together. Or so I thought. I remembered the night we signed our first deal. Hazel had popped a bottle of Prosecco on the porch, barefoot, dancing to music on her phone. She'd called me her quiet genius. Back then, it felt like love. Now, I wondered if it had always been performance. I thought of her father, the way he shook my hand when he retired. He said I reminded him of himself when he still gave a damn. He gave me 45% of the company not as a gift, but because I earned it. Worked for it. Now I was being cut loose without so much as a conversation. I reached into the cabinet for a glass, not coffee this time. Scotch. Neat. It was too early, and I didn't care. I took a sip and let the burn remind me I was still standing. My phone buzzed again. This time, I didn't look. That silence, mine, not theirs, would be the loudest thing I ever said. And they would hear it. Every single day. I met Hazel in a shared economics class during junior year. She was bold and sharp, always 2 steps ahead of the discussion. I sat in the third row with my notes in crisp order, content to let others talk. She noticed me because I didn't try to impress her. That's what she once told me on our second date. Everyone else performs. You just show up. Back then, it sounded like admiration. Now, I wonder if it was foreshadowing. After we graduated, Hazel took the spotlight with her sister Brielle, joining their father at Mirabelle and Company, a boutique logistics firm built by their grandfather and expanded by their dad. I didn't walk into the company through Hazel. I entered through the back door, operations intern, unpaid for the first 6 months. Hazel didn't even mention we were dating until the end of that year. I worked every angle: supply chains, vendor logistics, fleet efficiency. I was the guy people called when deliveries went wrong, when trucks broke down at 2 a.m., when warehouse managers missed quotas. I solved fires before they sparked. That was my skill, making the hard parts invisible. Hazel and Brielle were always at the front: brand launches, trade shows, news interviews. The face and the voice. Meanwhile, I was the hands, the unglamorous middle. When their father retired, he handed me something I never asked for: 45% of the company's shares. Everyone clapped. Everyone smiled. Hazel included. But the silence between us that night was heavy. "You know what this means," she said, sitting cross-legged on our bed. "You're not just the guy behind the curtain anymore." She meant it as a compliment. I heard it as a warning. The years that followed blurred into long nights and endless forecasts. I wasn't bitter. I believed in the mission. I believed in them. There were moments when it felt like a partnership. When Hazel would text me at 1 a.m., "We couldn't do this without you," and I'd smile in the dark. I held on to those little signs. Because I thought I mattered. Not just as her husband, but as her equal. But slowly, the seams began to pull. I started noticing changes in the board meetings, items skipped over, votes taken while I was working late in the dispatch unit. Financial projections didn't match internal trends. Budget decisions were approved without my review. I chalked it up to oversight. I didn't want to believe Hazel, my Hazel, was part of it. She'd brush me off with a kiss. "Let us handle this part, babe. You've done enough. You need to breathe too." But her version of breathing meant keeping me far from strategy. I was a fixer, not a visionary. I wasn't the polished speaker or the charming negotiator. I was the guy with spreadsheets and quiet solutions. That suited everyone just fine, until the moment they decided I no longer suited the company. The voicemail didn't hurt because it was abrupt. It hurt because it confirmed what I had been avoiding for months. I was no longer wanted. Not just as an executive, but as a partner. The marriage and the business were tangled together like wires behind a wall. And Hazel, with one message, cut through both. The part that stung the most wasn't that they fired me. It was that they didn't even pretend to value the years I gave them. They didn't soften the blow with a face-to-face conversation or a call filled with half-hearted regrets. They used a voicemail, like they were canceling a dentist appointment. I found myself standing in the company's empty executive lounge 2 days after the message. Nobody had officially removed me from the building yet. It was early, before 7 a.m., and the place smelled like polished oak and overbrewed coffee. I looked at the framed company photo from 3 years ago. Hazel stood in the center, Brielle on her right, and me, off to the side, barely visible behind one of the junior partners. Smiling, yes, but fading. I remembered what Hazel's father said during that photo shoot. "You don't always have to be in the spotlight to hold the frame together." He meant it as wisdom, but maybe it was just a polite warning. I should have paid attention. I returned home and sat in the living room, watching the ceiling fan spin. I thought about every moment I swallowed doubt. Every time I told myself, "It's not that serious. They'll come around." But they never did, because they never had to. I made it easy. I showed up, cleaned messes, fixed their mistakes, and never once asked for credit. I made myself essential, but not indispensable. And when people can't imagine losing you, they'll protect you. But when they know you'll stay no matter how you're treated, they stop trying. Hazel didn't even try. I opened my laptop that night and started digging through payroll ledgers, project timelines, my original shareholder agreement. I wasn't looking to retaliate. Not yet. I just needed to remind myself of the truth. I was part of this company. I gave it life when shipments stalled, when contracts broke, when morale dipped. I kept it breathing. Now they were acting like I never mattered. That I had been carried instead of carrying. But I wasn't going to scream or demand respect. No. I was going to find the margin where they tried to write me off, and I was going to rewrite it. Quietly. With precision. They thought I was just a numbers guy. They were about to learn what numbers can do when they're weaponized by the man who built them. I was eating lunch alone when I saw it. The restaurant was quiet, midweek lull, half full. I sat by the window, half focused on a grilled chicken sandwich I wasn't enjoying and scanning logistics reports on my tablet. The sunlight hit the glass just right, making the screen glare. So I set it aside, picked up my phone, and absent-mindedly opened Instagram. And there it was, right between a travel blogger's waterfall shot and an ad for custom watches. Hazel, smiling like betrayal tasted sweet. Brielle beside her, one hand raised mid-toast. And between them stood a man I had never seen before. Tall, confident, wearing a deep navy suit that probably cost more than my mortgage. The caption read, "A new chapter for Mirabelle and Company begins, with innovation and vision." I didn't blink. My thumb froze above the screen. The sandwich grew cold in my hand. Innovation and vision. I read those words over and over. They might as well have posted a video of them driving a knife between my ribs. So this was it. The replacement. The new partner. Not a single board memo. Not a single courtesy call. They moved on with the kind of speed you only achieve when you've been planning it for months. And I had been too blind, too trusting, to see the writing on the wall. My appetite disappeared. I closed the app and just sat there, the chatter of nearby tables fading into a muffled buzz. I was numb, but not surprised. That's what hurt the most. I'd seen the signs, but I'd filed them under temporary tension. I thought they'd pass, that we'd circle back. I didn't expect this permanent exclusion. I paid the bill in silence and left the restaurant. Back at home, the walls of the house I once called ours felt too wide. Hazel's touches were still everywhere. Throw pillows she obsessed over, succulents that somehow thrived despite my neglect, the scent of her lavender oil lingering near the stairs. I stood in the living room, phone in hand, and stared at her contact. I should have deleted it. I should have walked away. But something inside me, maybe the part that still needed to believe she could explain this, told me to call. She picked up on the third ring. "Well, look who remembered I exist," Hazel answered, her voice light but tight, like she was trying to sound unbothered. I could hear a faint hum of conversation behind her, glasses clinking, people talking. A celebration. Probably the same one from the photo. "What the hell is going on, Hazel?" I said, calm but cutting. She laughed softly. "Luca, don't be dramatic. Everything's just moving quickly right now." "Quickly? You brought in a partner without informing me. I still own 45%. Technically," she said, stretching the word like taffy. "But you've been disengaged. We needed someone with actual strategic direction." That word again. Strategy. Like I was some glorified clipboard holder. And then Brielle's voice chimed in, louder, closer to the phone. "You were always better at spreadsheets than steering the ship anyway, Luca. No hard feelings." I felt something break. It didn't crack loudly. It didn't shatter all at once. It just broke, quietly, like a tired thread giving way after holding too much for too long. I hung up without another word. No yelling. No arguing. They weren't worth the performance. Instead, I went to my office and pulled out a binder labeled Legacy Docs. In it were all my ownership documents. My copies of quarterly contributions. Records of every time I used personal funds to cover payroll shortfalls or front delivery equipment repairs without charging interest. Every line signed by Hazel or Brielle. Proof, not just of my role, but of their dependency on me. For years, I told myself I was building with them, that we were a team. But teams don't cut you out behind your back. Teams don't toast to your replacement on Instagram while you're still paying property taxes on the company HQ. I poured a drink, sat down at the desk, and I stared at my name on those contracts like I was looking at a stranger. I didn't know how long I sat there, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 2 hours, but by the time I stood up, something had shifted in me. Not rage, not despair, something sharper, more focused. They thought I was the silent one, the safe one, the man who kept the gears turning but never touched the steering wheel. They built a brand on my back and decided it was okay to discard me like a placeholder in their narrative. But they forgot the most important rule in business. You never underestimate the man who keeps the books. I opened my laptop and created a new folder. Reclamation. Inside, I dropped scans of every signed contract, annotated emails, calendar invites showing my involvement in major deals, personal financial transfers, everything. I labeled each one meticulously. No flair, no emotion, just facts. The kind of facts that don't ask for attention, but command consequences. I didn't know exactly what I'd do yet, but for the first time since that voicemail, I felt like I could breathe again. Not because I had clarity, but because I had nothing left to lose. And men with nothing left to lose? They don't yell. They don't beg. They build. Quietly. Thoroughly. And when they're done building, they make sure the people who once toasted without them never drink easy again. Here's a strange kind of clarity that comes when you realize you've been invisible in your own life. I sat at the edge of her bed that evening, the light from the hallway catching on the framed wedding photo still hanging on the wall. Hazel was in white, delicate lace along her collarbone, laughing as I kissed her knuckles. I remembered that moment. It felt real then. She had squeezed my hand before the photographer clicked, a little signal that we were in this together. I used to look at that photo when days were hard, when the work felt like drowning. Now it just felt like a staged lie. The signs had been there all along. I just hadn't wanted to see them. The late-night meetings I was never looped into. It's just branding stuff, she'd say, pecking me on the cheek like a pat on the head. The board votes scheduled without me. Oh, we assumed you were too buried in logistics, Brielle would explain, sipping her matcha like it was a cure for guilt. I had trained myself to accept it, to interpret exclusion as trust. You're the backbone, Hazel would say, and we don't want to burn you out. I thought she meant that lovingly. Now I know it meant, stay in your lane. But I didn't just stay. I gave. I poured myself into every corner of that company. The late fees I quietly paid off from our joint account when the fulfillment warehouse flooded. The bonuses I suggested we delay when we had a down quarter, except I still made sure payroll hit on time. The branding deal that nearly collapsed when a distributor pulled out? I called in a favor from a supplier I met 5 years ago, salvaged the entire shipment route, and never once asked for public credit. I was the behind-the-scenes husband, the man who held the camera instead of posing for it. Hazel and Brielle liked to call me their safety net, the one who caught problems before they reached them. They said it like a compliment. But what's a net, really? Something stretched thin, something used and walked across. And when it rips, they replace it. I walked through our house that night and saw the story I'd ignored. Everything in here bore Hazel's taste: sage green walls, framed quotes about ambition and power, minimalist furniture that somehow never felt comfortable. I'd learned to fit into her aesthetic, just like I'd learned to shrink into my role at the company. It wasn't resentment I felt. It was embarrassment. Embarrassment that I'd mistaken proximity for partnership. Because I truly believed we were a team. That every sacrifice I made, working 70-hour weeks, skipping holidays, not pushing back when Brielle steamrolled over my projections, was for our future. Our shared empire. But it wasn't. I was building their dream, funded with my sweat, my savings, and my silence. I remember one winter when we almost missed payroll. Hazel panicked. She looked at me like the floor had vanished under her heels. I said nothing. Just opened my private account and wired enough to cover every staff member, down to the weekend janitors. I didn't want applause. I just didn't want our people to suffer. She kissed me hard that night and called me her hero. Now she's toasting new partners in dresses I haven't seen her wear in years. I walked into my office and pulled open the drawer with the manila folders. One of them was labeled contingencies. Inside were invoices I'd fronted for outsourced fleet management, hazmat compliance training I paid for out of pocket, and debt restructuring paperwork from a year ago that I'd handled while Hazel was in Turks and Caicos with Brielle for a wellness retreat. None of this had been glamorous. None of it had ever been mentioned on social media or in shareholder letters. But every time the company made it through a rough quarter, it was because I had been plugging the holes underwater while they stood on deck waving to investors. It was strange. I didn't feel rage. I felt power. Quiet, steady power. Because I knew something they didn't. They thought I was just the husband, the fixer, the man who didn't speak unless asked a question. But I had everything documented. Everything. They had faces and flair. I had the foundation. And the thing about foundations? You never notice them until they crack. I sat at my desk and opened an email draft addressed to no one. A way to think out loud. I am not disposable, I typed. I am not an accessory to your image. I am the reason your image was ever stable. I didn't send it. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in months, I saw myself clearly. Not as the husband in the background. Not as the co-founder left off the press releases. But as the one man holding all the receipts. And if they wanted to pretend I didn't matter, fine. I could vanish. But I'd make sure when I did, the silence I left behind would be the loudest sound they'd ever hear. I didn't go to war. I went to Miriam. It was a quiet Thursday when I pulled into the underground parking garage of Whitestone Legal. My hands weren't shaking, though I expected them to be. Everything that had happened should have made me furious, should have had me pacing, shouting, unraveling. But instead, there was this eerie calm. Like something inside me had gone still to make room for precision. Miriam Graves had been a rising legal star when we met 5 years ago. She was launching a niche startup to help small logistics firms handle cross-state compliance. She needed expertise in operational modeling. I gave her my nights for 3 weeks straight. No fee, just goodwill. She called me a logistics surgeon in an email once. I never deleted it. Now, I needed her scalpel. Her office looked like something from a legal drama: tall glass windows, steel gray bookshelves, a wall of framed accolades that were somehow tasteful and intimidating at once. Miriam stood when I entered. Sharp suit. No nonsense. But the second she saw my face, her expression softened. "Luca," she said, gesturing toward the seat across from her. "I was wondering when you'd call." That sentence landed like a weight. She already knew something was wrong. Of course she did. I didn't waste time. I opened the leather folder I had carried in and spread out the contents like evidence on a courtroom table. Contracts, transaction logs, signed approvals, emails, the paper trail of my sacrifice. She flipped through the documents in silence, eyes scanning, highlighter dancing. When she got to the shareholder agreement, the one Hazel's father signed before retiring, she paused. Her lips tightened. 45%, she murmured. And no retraction clause without mutual consent. "You're still very much in this company." I nodded. They left a voicemail. Her brow lifted slightly. "They what?" I tapped my phone, hit play. Hazel and Brielle's voices spilled out into the office like ghosts from another life. Miriam listened with her arms crossed, expression unreadable. When it ended, she leaned back, exhaled slowly, and stared at me. "They're either incredibly stupid or incredibly confident you won't push back." "I've never been the loud one," I said. She tilted her head. "Then maybe it's time you make some noise." I stared at her, weighing that. Making noise had never been my style. I built quietly. I solved problems without drawing attention. But this wasn't about pride anymore. It wasn't about revenge either. It was about making sure they never erased me again. "I don't want to go back," I said finally. "Not to the company. Not to her." Miriam nodded. "Then let's talk about leaving. On your terms." She explained it with clinical precision. I didn't need to fight them in court. I could sell, not to them, but to someone who would force their hand. A private venture fund, she said, could buy out my shares and enforce corporate accountability. No yelling, no lawsuits. Just a clean, strategic extraction with devastating consequences for anyone who wasn't playing by the rules. She already had someone in mind. "They specialize in ownership transitions," she said. "Think of them as corporate vacuum cleaners. Ruthless, tidy, and thorough." That was exactly what I wanted. I gave her permission to initiate contact, and before I left, she said something that stuck with me. "Luca, they thought they were cutting you off. What they actually did was light the match under their own foundation. Most men in your position would be out for blood. But you're out for closure. That's dangerous." In the best way. I left her office without a backward glance. The next few days moved quickly. The fund, named Sable Grove Partners, was sharper than I expected. They asked for everything: documented roles, financial history, digital access to the company's books. I gave them all of it. Quietly. No announcements. No warnings. Just a surgical upload of truth. What struck me most was how simple it was. No fireworks. No screaming matches or angry boardroom showdowns. Just lawyers and numbers. And with every file I handed over, I felt something loosen inside my chest. It wasn't just business anymore. It was cleansing. Hazel still hadn't called. Neither had Brielle. Maybe they thought my silence meant surrender. Let them think that. When the preliminary valuation came back, Sable Grove offered full market value for my shares. No haggling. No delay. They wanted my stake clean and fast. I sat in Miriam's office the morning I signed the final documents. She watched me carefully. "You sure you're ready to be done?" she asked. I looked down at the contract. I think I was done the moment I hit play on that voicemail. The pen felt heavy in my hand. Not because I doubted the decision, but because it was final. This wasn't just walking away. This was ending the chapter before they could rewrite it without me. I signed, page after page, name after name. When it was over, I stood. Miriam extended her hand. "They won't see this coming." "Good," I said, because I didn't either. That night, I went home and poured myself a drink, not out of grief, but ritual. I sat on the back deck. The city lights faint in the distance and finally replied to Hazel's voicemail. One word. Understood. No venom. No fear. Just a seal on the silence. And somewhere deep in the dark, I knew what was coming next. The silence was about to get very, very loud. I didn't tell anyone when I signed the papers. No announcements. No press release. Just me, Miriam, a stack of contracts, and a pen that glided smoother than I expected. Selling my 45% stake in Mirabelle and Company should have felt like cutting off a limb. Instead, it felt like closing a door I hadn't realized was open for too long. The buyers, Sable Grove Partners, moved quickly. They didn't waste time with pleasantries or inflated egos. They saw what I saw. A valuable company being mismanaged by people more interested in image than infrastructure. Once the ink dried, the silence settled in. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was weighted, like a storm cloud too still to trust. I went home, changed into a plain gray t-shirt and jeans, and walked into the kitchen where Hazel's ceramic mugs still hung from the rack she insisted on installing. I made myself tea instead of coffee, calm instead of caffeine. My phone was on silent, screen down on the counter. I didn't want any distractions when I sent the message. I pulled up the voicemail again, Hazel and Brielle's voices, stiff with rehearsed authority, and played it once more. You're out of the family business, Luca. Expect a call from our lawyer. Brielle's voice followed, polished and smug. This is final. I stopped the playback, closed my eyes, and exhaled. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Understood. The message felt like closure. I hit send. I didn't expect a response. Not right away. Maybe not at all. They had gotten what they wanted, hadn't they? Or so they thought. They'd cut me out, pushed me aside like a file they no longer needed on the server. The last thing they'd expect was to wake up and find the locks changed. That night, I slept better than I had in months. I didn't dream about the office, about Hazel's cold stares or Brielle's dismissive smirks. I didn't replay meetings where I'd been muted or overruled. My body finally understood it wasn't being held hostage anymore. By morning, the silence cracked. The first sign came not from Hazel, but from a mutual contact, Jordan, the CFO I'd brought on 2 years ago. He was the first to text, "Hey man, did you approve the Sable Grove acquisition? I thought you were still on hold with the audit committee." I stared at the message for a moment, then smiled faintly. The ripple had begun. Sable Grove had done their homework. They weren't buying goodwill, they were buying leverage. They didn't just acquire my shares, they acquired the ability to see the whole boardroom from a different angle. They requested internal audits, reevaluated quarterly projections, froze discretionary spending, and paused all new vendor contracts. And they did it all within 48 hours. That's when Hazel called. I didn't answer. Then Brielle texted, "Did you seriously just sell to Sable Grove? Luca, they're tearing apart the budget." I left it on read. By the third day, my missed call log looked like a stock ticker. Hazel, Brielle, their attorney, the HR director, even Hazel's mother. It was all happening faster than they could process. Because they hadn't planned for me to leave strategically. They expected me to crawl away wounded, not walk away holding the detonator. I finally answered on call 93. Hazel's voice was frantic, stripped of her usual composure. "Luca, you can't do this. You didn't even give us a chance to eat." "To what?" I asked calmly. "Explain after the fact? You sold your shares to vultures," she hissed. "They're threatening to restructure the entire company. They're looking at everything, old budgets, travel expenses, vendor payments." "Good," I said. "Maybe they'll find what I found." There was a pause. Then Brielle's voice cut in. "We didn't mean to push you out like that, Luca. We were just trying to move fast." "No, you meant it. You wanted me quiet. Gone. Erased. You wanted my silence without earning it. Now you're going to learn what silence costs." Hazel exhaled like she'd been punched. "You never wanted revenge. That's not who you are." She was right. I didn't want revenge. I wanted respect. And when that wasn't an option, I chose consequence. "I'm not coming back," I said, final and clear. "I'm not interested in undoing what's done. You made your move. I made mine." I hung up before they could respond. Not out of anger, but to preserve what little grace I had left. The next few days were a blur of second-hand updates. Sable Grove appointed their own CFO to conduct an internal review. They asked tough questions, ones that Hazel and Brielle weren't prepared to answer. Travel reimbursements flagged. Inflated contractor fees questioned. Bonuses issued during negative quarters red flagged. And then came the internal memo. I wasn't supposed to see it, but I did. A former assistant forwarded it to me. The subject line read, Mirabelle and Company, Phase 1 Restructuring. The content was short, clinical, cold. Effective immediately, Sable Grove will initiate performance-based staff assessments. All C-suite decisions will be temporarily frozen. An operational efficiency audit will commence Monday. Translation? They were cleaning house. And I wasn't there to stop it. Not because I couldn't, but because I chose not to. The house they tried to kick me out of? I sold it, with termites still in the walls. And now the new owners were bringing bulldozers. The first call came at 6:14 a.m. I was brushing my teeth when the screen lit up. Hazel. I didn't answer. I just let the buzzing stop while I leaned over the sink, spit, rinsed, and stared at myself in the mirror. There were new lines under my eyes. I looked older than I felt, but calmer, too. Solid. I watched the phone go dark again on the counter. Then it rang again. Hazel. Then Brielle. Then the office line from Mirabelle and Company. By the time I made coffee and sat at the kitchen island, the screen had 20 missed calls. I scrolled through them absently, like flipping through pages in a magazine I didn't care to finish. I set the phone to silent and poured maple syrup on my toast. Ate slowly. Enjoyed it. The next time I checked, the number was up to 42. By mid-afternoon, 92. Calls, voicemails, texts. Some panicked. Some pleading. Most angry. The kind of frantic chaos that only happens when people realize too late that the floor beneath them was never theirs to stand on. I finally picked up the 93rd. Luca. Hazel's voice cracked across the line like someone was shaking her. Luca, you have to talk to me. I said nothing. They're freezing our accounts, she rushed on. Our marketing funds, our discretionary budgets, everything's locked. They're asking for invoices I've never even seen. Brielle's voice jumped in from the background. They're talking about breach claims. Do you understand what you've done? I sipped my coffee. You made it clear. I wasn't part of the business anymore. I figured I should act like it. That's not what we meant, Hazel snapped. I smiled to myself. You said it in a voicemail. There was a long pause on the line. I could hear Hazel breathing, shallow and uneven. You sold to people who are digging into every detail of our operations, she said, voice lower now. They've already suspended 3 department heads. They're threatening to reverse our Q2 bonuses. They're looking at things we did for morale. For the brand. For yourselves, I said calmly. Not for the company. Brielle's voice sharpened. You've always been petty. You think you're so noble, but you waited until we made a move to strike back. No, I replied. I waited until I realized you'd never see me as more than a spare tire. You only needed me when something went flat. Hazel tried again, gentler this time. We were under pressure, Luca. Things moved quickly. Maybe we made a mistake. But this is cruel. No, I said again. This is math. Actions have costs. You dismissed me without a conversation. You replaced me in a press post. You never even asked what I wanted. She was quiet. I didn't want revenge, I continued. I wanted to be respected. You didn't give me that. So I gave myself the closure you never offered. There was nothing else to say. I hung up. This time, I didn't feel angry or sad. I didn't feel triumphant either. It wasn't victory. It was confirmation. That my silence had weight. That my absence had teeth. I took a walk to clear my head, phone left behind. The late afternoon breeze cut through my shirt and pulled at the edges of my thoughts. I walked past the shops Hazel used to drag me into, eco-home boutiques with overpriced faces, skincare spots with walls of rosewater and glass. I remembered how she used to talk to the owners like she was mentoring them. I'd just stand behind her, holding the bags. The invisible husband. Back then, I thought that was love. Now I knew it was positioning. When I got home, there were 11 new voicemails. I didn't listen to any of them. I forwarded them to Miriam instead. Sable Grove had already begun their full operational audit. Miriam had warned me. Once the documents were reviewed, the fallout would be brutal. She wasn't exaggerating. Hazel and Brielle had run parts of the business like a trust fund hobby. Their branding trips to Napa, Paris, Santorini, Mazda's global strategy tours were all being reviewed. Expense reports were riddled with personal costs. Some staff had received double bonuses. There were vendor contracts approved without cross-signatures, some of which linked back to friends of Brielle, who'd been quietly overcharging the company. I'd seen the signs. I just hadn't known how deep it went. And now? They were panicking because the man they pushed out had been the only one holding it all together. Later that evening, I poured a glass of bourbon and stepped out onto the balcony. The sky was darkening, streaked with orange and violet. My phone buzzed once more. This time, I answered. Hazel's voice was different, smaller. "They're going to dissolve the board," she said. "Sable Grove's cleaning house." "Good," I replied. "They want me to take a leave of absence." "You should," I said. "You need time to remember what actual work feels like." Another silence. "I didn't want it to end like this," she whispered. Neither did I. I hung up again. The last words I spoke that day were to myself. "You wanted to erase me. Now you're learning what it feels like to be erased." And the truth is, the numbers never lie. But people? They lie to your face. Then they cry when the truth shows up in a tailored suit holding a balance sheet. The audit reports came in like a slow flood, one file at a time, each more damning than the last. Miriam sent me the first summary in a password-protected email titled, "Findings, Phase 1. I sat in my home office, the only light coming from my monitor, and read through line after line with the kind of quiet that only precedes demolition. Sable Grove's forensic team had been thorough. They weren't just looking for errors, they were digging for deception. And they found it in every corner of the business I'd once helped hold upright. The first red flag was the travel budget. Over 18 months, nearly $430,000 had been funneled into global expansion initiatives, most of which were luxury retreats, influencer summits, and private excursions to wine regions that had nothing to do with logistics or operations. Photos posted to Instagram had long been scrubbed or archived, but expense reports told the truth. Brielle was the biggest offender. She'd been submitting overlapping invoices, booking through her personal assistant and again through the company card. Duplicate entries, slightly altered descriptions. A hotel listed as client meeting venue in one file and leadership wellness stay in another. One resort in Tulum even had a spa receipt billed under market research, Latin America expansion. I remembered that trip. She came back tanned, laughing, talking about the emotional energy of quartz. I hadn't questioned it. I should have. Hazel's name came up next. Not in grand fraud, but in silent approval. She'd co-signed half the reimbursements. Backdated others. Forwarded payment emails with the phrase, "Clear this for optics, but flag as internal." What that meant in practice was, don't ask questions, just make it disappear. The buyers found it all. The breaches weren't just technical, they were strategic. They had created a shell of a company with designer veneers and hollow books. And my quiet, invisible contributions? The money I wired during bad quarters? It had covered the shortfall, paid off vendors, padded payroll when marketing drained the reserves. My sacrifices had funded their facade, and now the buyers had receipts. Miriam called me 2 days after the full audit dropped. "They're preparing breach of fiduciary duty claims," she said. "They won't press charges unless Hazel and Brielle contest the restructuring, but they've made it clear, if either of them obstructs the transition, they'll go public." I leaned back in my chair, the ceiling fan whirring above me. "So they're backed into a corner." "Exactly," Miriam said. "Hazel is still trying to negotiate a softer exit. But Brielle? She's panicking. She called the auditors yesterday and accused them of harassment." I couldn't help but laugh. "She thought branding could save everything," I said. "You can't hashtag your way out of an audit." "They've also asked me to relay something," Miriam added. "The board wants to meet with you. Not for decisions. For clarification. Historical record. Your name is on too many foundational documents for them to close this chapter without your version." I stared at the phone. "They want to understand how it got this bad," she said. "They already know," I replied. "They just didn't want to believe it." That night, I opened the shared drive that housed every internal project from the last 6 years. I didn't need access anymore. Sable Grove had full control. But I looked anyway. Some part of me needed to see it again. To look at what I helped build before it was buried under spin and smiling faces. I found an old proposal Hazel and I wrote together. An internal development roadmap from 4 years ago. The title page had both our names. The tone was optimistic. Clear goals. Honest projections. That version of us had been real, once. Before ego. Before image. Before Brielle convinced Hazel that emotion had no place in leadership and that I, with all my practicality and quiet, wasn't a partner, just a placeholder. They'd made their choices. And now, it was their turn to be scrutinized. Hazel texted me again the next morning. "Can we talk?" "I'm not defending everything, but there's context you don't know." I didn't respond. A few hours later, Another message came through. This one from Brielle. You've made your point. You've embarrassed us enough. Just remember, if you had spoken up, none of this would have happened. You stayed silent until it benefited you. I stared at her words for a long time. Silence. That was the weapon they gave me. That's what they mistook for weakness. They never noticed that I'd been documenting everything. Not out of malice. Out of habit. I believed in records. Accuracy. Accountability. They gambled on the assumption that I wouldn't fight back. What they didn't count on was that I wouldn't need to. I didn't have to sabotage them. They were already standing on a house of glass. Overdrawn accounts, false confidence, and the illusion of control. All I did was pull my weight out from under the structure. And it collapsed. I didn't hate them. That was the strangest part. I didn't wish them suffering. I just wanted them to see me. To realize that while they curated the image, I carried the burden. Hazel once told me, after one of our best quarters, "You're the safest man I know." I remember smiling then, thinking it was a compliment. Now I know what she meant. Safe meant invisible, predictable, easy to overlook. They built their empire on my shoulders and called me dependable. But the moment I stepped away, they found out what I'd really been. Essential. The final notice came on a rainy Tuesday, delivered by a courier with tired eyes and a rain-speckled envelope. I already knew what was inside before I opened it. The return address read her name in bold print, Hazel Mirabelle Cross. No company logo, no apology, just the raw formality of someone who'd once shared my pillow, now submitting documents to end a shared life. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I sat at the dining table where we used to host quiet dinners, her candlelit centerpieces still shoved in a drawer somewhere, and unfolded the papers. Petition for dissolution of marriage, citing irreconcilable differences, accompanied by a supplemental claim for emotional distress and reputational damage due to unexpected and aggressive divestment actions by respondent. She had made it sound so clinical, like we weren't lovers once, like I hadn't spent years defending her decisions, biting my tongue at Brielle's entitlement, covering company debts, and believing in her brilliance even when it came at the cost of my own. She didn't mention that, just that I'd made her look weak. I slid the papers aside and sat back in my chair. The thunder rumbled outside, low and distant, like a war too far gone to stop. This wasn't a rupture. It was a burial. We weren't just ending a business or a marriage. We were laying to rest the illusion that either had ever been mutual. Mirabelle and Company had been officially dissolved a week earlier. Sable Grove dismantled it piece by piece. The logistics core, the contracts I'd cultivated, the vendor relationships I'd maintained, those were salvaged and absorbed into a leaner division under new leadership. The name Mirabelle was removed from every document, every title, every digital footer. The brand was gone. The logo scrubbed. The social media accounts deleted or archived. Brielle had been fired. Hazel was placed on unpaid leave pending the results of Sable Grove's breach of duty review, which, Miriam informed me, was already leaning toward public censure unless she agreed to withdraw completely and sign a non-disclosure agreement. The legacy they'd been so desperate to control, it had been dismantled in weeks. And all I did was sell. Not because I wanted to burn it all down, because I was tired of pretending I mattered to people who only needed me when the roof leaked. Grief came in strange waves. It wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet. A fork in the sink that used to be hers. An empty toothbrush holder. A recipe note left in the margins of our shared cookbook. Add cinnamon for warmth. H. I stared at that scribble longer than I should have. There had been warmth once. And laughter. And belief. But it had all been buried beneath ambition and control. We didn't lose each other overnight. We drifted slowly, steadily, pretending the distance was just temporary. I told myself her coldness was stress, that her silence was focus. But deep down, I knew. I had known for months, maybe years. She saw me as reliable, not exciting, solid, not brilliant, steady, not necessary. And once I stopped serving her narrative, I was expendable. I didn't contest the divorce. Miriam offered options. We could challenge the distress claim. We have leverage. I declined. What was the point? Let her write the ending she wanted. I had already started a news story. The last time I saw Hazel was in a conference room, 2 weeks before the papers arrived. She wore a pale blue blazer and no makeup. Her hands trembled when she reached for the coffee the assistant offered. I almost didn't recognize her without the armor of confidence. She looked at me like she didn't know where to start. "Do you hate me?" she asked, finally. I didn't answer right away. I watched her, the woman I once built a life around, now sitting across from me like a stranger wearing a costume made from memories. "No," I said. "I just don't respect you anymore." Her eyes welled, but she blinked it back. "You didn't even give me a chance to explain." "You explained with a voicemail," I replied. "You made your decision. All I did was believe you." She nodded, looking down. "We were supposed to build something lasting." "We did," I said. "You just didn't like that I held the foundation." That was the last real conversation we had. She sent a follow-up email a week later. "I hope someday we can talk without lawyers in the room." I didn't reply. The strangest part of grief is not the moments when you feel broken. It's the moments when you feel nothing at all, when you look at the ruins and feel no urge to rebuild. Just a quiet acknowledgement that you've survived the collapse. That was me now. The house was quiet. My life was simple. No more board meetings. No more explaining my worth. No more dinners where my ideas were nodded at and then ignored. Hazel had her silence. So did I. Only mine had peace in it. I looked at the signed divorce papers one last time before sliding them into a file drawer labeled Closed Chapters. A formality. A signature. A funeral with no flowers. No music. Just truth. And truth, when you finally stop fighting it, doesn't need ceremony. It just needs to be accepted. Now I live in the quiet. The kind that doesn't feel empty, just honest. My house sits on the outskirts of Charlotte, nestled between pine and maple, tucked far enough from the main road that visitors hesitate at the gate. That's how I like it. The villa is modest by the standards Hazel used to chase. One floor, broad windows, no marble, just warm wood, clean lines, and space that breathes. I wake up with the sun, no alarms, no bored calls, no tension coiled in my spine before my feet touch the floor. I didn't just leave the company. I left the version of myself who begged to be seen. The mornings are slower now. Coffee brewed on my schedule. My inbox is lean. Founders, startups, logistics heads wanting strategy without spin. That's what I offer now, clarity. I don't pitch dreams. I patch holes. Quietly. Thoroughly. I've become the guy you call when you're 2 bad quarters from collapse and need someone to cut through the noise. I'm not flashy. I don't sell visions. I offer survival. And they listen. Because unlike Hazel and Brielle, these people know what it costs to build something that doesn't crumble under the weight of ego. I named the firm Crosspoint, not because I needed my name on a door, but because I wanted it to stand for something grounded. A pivot. A clean line from disaster to decision. It's just me and 2 analysts I trust. No one here cares what shoes you wear to work or how viral your brand is. We deal in substance. Sometimes I wonder if Hazel follows the new name. If she's watched me rebuild from the sidelines. If she regrets the way things ended. I know she sent a few emails. Apologies dressed in justifications. Brielle tried too. One long message about perspective and legacy and how we all got caught up in the image. I didn't reply to either of them. Not because I'm cruel, but because they were right, in a way. I was the numbers guy, the quiet husband, the dependable one. But they forgot something critical. I wasn't just keeping the lights on. I was wiring the whole system. And I didn't need their apology to validate that anymore. One evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, watching the breeze move through the trees. My neighbor's kids were playing with a dog in their yard, laughing, tumbling over each other in the grass. The kind of laughter that doesn't carry history behind it. It reminded me that life doesn't stop when people fail you. It just shifts, finds new ways to offer beauty, if you're willing to see it. I get calls now from people who used to ignore me in board meetings. CFOs who used to nod and dismiss. Now they ask for my input, my feedback, my time. They say things like, "I wish we'd appreciated you more back then." I keep those calls short, respectful, professional, but I don't pretend to forget, because I'm not angry anymore. But I remember everything. One client, a startup logistics firm based out of Raleigh, asked me once why I left a company as legendary as Mirabelle and Company. I smiled and gave them the diplomatic answer. The story got too loud. I said, I needed room to hear myself think again. It was true in a way, but the full truth was more personal. They built their empire on aesthetics, on applause. I built it on sacrifice. And when the applause stopped, only one of us had anything left to stand on. They overlooked me for years. In meetings, in speeches, in press releases. I was always Hazel's husband, the operations guy, Mr. Quiet Genius. It was meant to flatter, but it flattened me instead. Now, I'm not the man in the background. I'm the man who walked away when the stage got too crowded and built something better off-screen. Sometimes, late at night, I think about who I used to be. The man who waited up for Hazel's plane to land, who canceled trips to make sure her presentations launched on time, who edited budgets while she slept, just to make her feel like the business was thriving. He loved her deeply. He believed in the future they planned. But he's gone now, and I don't miss him. I kept one photo from that life, just one. It's not from the wedding or a party. It's from a night in our first office when the power went out and Hazel and I worked by candlelight, laughing as we hand-wrote shipping labels to keep an order on schedule. Before the brand deals, before the boardrooms, before the betrayals. That was us at our purest, unvarnished, unentitled, unstoppable. I keep that photo in a drawer, not on display. Not because I'm hiding it, but because I've learned to carry the past without letting it decorate the present. This life is quiet. It doesn't trend. It doesn't sparkle. But it's mine. And the best part? I no longer fight to be noticed. Because I finally see myself. And that's enough. I've always believed in letting actions speak louder than words, and perhaps that's why I never felt the need to announce my achievements to the world, especially not to Anna, my wife. To her, I was just David, her husband who brought home an average paycheck and lived a quiet life. She never asked too many questions about my work, and I never volunteered information. That was fine by me. The less she knew, the less she could weaponize if things ever went south. For context, I'm the CEO of a mid-sized company, a position I earned through years of hard work, discipline, and more sleepless nights than I care to admit. But I've never been one to flaunt titles or boast about success. I preferred to let my work define me rather than my title. Anna never showed any interest in my professional life, assuming I was just another regular employee in a sea of office workers. That suited me just fine. You see, when we got married, I didn't hide my career from her. I just didn't make it the center of our relationship. I wanted to be seen as more than my job, to build something meaningful with her that wasn't tied to material wealth or status. But over the years, I realized Anna wasn't the person I thought she was. Her priorities shifted, and with them, so did her attitude toward me. She started treating me like I was just a supporting character in her story, someone she could lean on when convenient and dismiss when I wasn't needed. My quiet nature became a target for her criticism. She called me passive, unambitious, even lazy at times. Little did she know the hours I put into building a business that provided for her every want and need. I didn't mind her misunderstanding me, at least not at first. I figured everyone's entitled to their opinions, and maybe I hadn't done enough to show her the depth of my efforts. But her dismissive tone grew sharper, her words cutting deeper. What started as small criticisms snowballed into full-blown disdain. And through it all, I stayed silent, absorbing her jabs like a sponge, hoping the storm would pass. But storms don't just pass. They grow until something breaks. Anna never asked me about my work, but she had no problem talking about hers, often comparing our contributions as if I was slacking off while she carried the weight of the household. I wanted to tell her about the sleepless nights, the endless meetings, the pressure of running a company, but something held me back. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was a subconscious test to see if she could appreciate me for who I was without the flashy title. Spoiler alert, she couldn't. And so, I played the role of the quiet husband, the one who never made waves, never contradicted her. It wasn't because I lacked the confidence to speak up, I just didn't see the point. Actions, I reminded myself, always speak louder than words. Looking back, I wonder if I should have set the record straight sooner. If I had told Anna who I was and what I did, would it have changed the way she treated me? Or would it have made things worse? These questions lingered in the back of my mind, but I never found the answers. Instead, I let her build her version of me in her mind, a foolish husband, as she liked to call me. Little did she know, the foolish husband she dismissed so easily was the man pulling strings she couldn't even see. And one day, she would come to learn just how wrong she had been. But by then, it would be too late. I wasn't just her husband, quietly putting up with her tantrums. I was David, the boss, the provider, the one who kept everything afloat. And soon, she would realize that. But for now, I let her live in blissful ignorance, oblivious to the storm that was brewing on the horizon. Actions, I reminded myself again, always speak louder than words. It didn't happen overnight. The cracks in our marriage started small, like hairline fractures that most people wouldn't notice at first glance. But over time, they widened, deepened, until they became impossible to ignore. At first, Anna's dismissive tone and sharp remarks stung, but I brushed them off. Marriage isn't perfect, I told myself. Everyone has bad days, and sometimes those bad days spill over into the people you care about. But with Anna, the bad days became the norm. Her words weren't just sharp. They were calculated, designed to undermine me. She'd sigh dramatically when I suggested ideas, or roll her eyes if I mentioned anything that didn't align with her expectations. "You're too passive, David," she'd say. "Why don't you ever take charge of anything?" The irony wasn't lost on me. If only she knew how many decisions I made daily, how many crises I resolved before they even reached her radar. I wanted to tell her, to lay out everything I did to keep our lives running smoothly, but a voice in my head always stopped me. Would she even care? Or would she find a way to twist my words into another weapon? It wasn't just the words, though. It was her attitude. Anna carried herself like she was the only one holding our marriage together, like she was the glue, and I was just a piece of the furniture she happened to own. She'd talk about her contributions to the household with pride, listing off expenses she covered as if she were balancing the national budget. "Do you know how much I had to spend on groceries this week?" she'd say, waving receipts in my face. "You wouldn't survive a day without me managing this house." I wanted to tell her about the monthly budget I meticulously planned, the accounts I balanced to ensure she could shop without worry, but I didn't. Not because I was afraid, but because I realized something crucial. No explanation would ever satisfy her. The worst part wasn't her attitude toward me. It was her lack of regard for the life we were supposed to be building together. She spoke as though the marriage was hers alone, something she carried on her shoulders while I sat idly by. There was no acknowledgement of partnership, no sense that we were in this together. And then there were the comparisons. Oh, the comparisons. She loved to remind me of what her friends' husbands were doing. "You know, Rachel's husband just got promoted. He's the VP of his company now," she'd say, glancing at me with thinly veiled disappointment. I wanted to laugh every time she said something like that. Rachel's husband? A VP? I could buy his company if I wanted to, but I kept that to myself. The comparisons weren't about ambition or success. They were about control. Anna needed to feel like she was superior, like she had the upper hand in our relationship. At some point, I stopped arguing. It wasn't worth it. If I challenged her, she'd just twist my words, and the argument would spiral into something far more toxic than it needed to be. So, I became quiet, not defeated, but observant. I watched her, listened to her, and cataloged every slight, every insult, every dismissive comment. And through it all, I wondered, how did we get here? When did the woman I married become someone who saw me as a burden instead of a partner? I still held on to hope back then. Hope that maybe she was just stressed, or that something external was causing her to lash out. But as time went on, it became clear that this wasn't a phase. This was who she was, and who she had decided I was. A man who wasn't worth her respect. It's strange, isn't it? How you can love someone and still feel like a stranger in their presence. That's how I felt with Anna. I loved her, or at least, I loved the version of her I thought I knew. But the person she had become? That person was a stranger, and I didn't know how to reach her. So, I stayed quiet. I kept my head down and did my job, both at work and at home. I let her think she was in control because, at the time, I thought it was easier that way. But deep down, I knew the truth. The marriage was a facade, and sooner or later, something would happen to shatter it completely. And when it did, I'd be ready. I always knew Anna's temper was like a lit fuse, short and volatile. But nothing could have prepared me for the explosion that came one fateful evening. It started like any other day. Work, dinner, and the subtle tension that had become the norm in our house. I was sitting in the living room, exhausted after a long day, while Anna flitted around the house, muttering under her breath about something that was apparently my fault. "You never do anything right, David," she spat out as she slammed a cabinet shut in the kitchen. I didn't even bother asking what she was referring to. After years of hearing the same refrain, it had lost its sting. I stayed quiet, letting her vent, hoping she'd tire herself out. But that night, she wasn't going to let it go. She marched into the living room, arms crossed, and fixed me with a glare that could have melted steel. Are you just going to sit there like a lump? Do you ever take initiative in anything, or do you enjoy being useless? She snapped. I looked up at her, calm as ever, and said, Anna, what exactly do you want from me? If you tell me what's wrong, I can help. That was the wrong thing to say. It always was. She didn't want help. She wanted a fight. What I want is a husband who doesn't act like a fool. You're always so passive, so clueless. Do you even care about this family? Or are you just here for the free meals? I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my composure. I care about this family more than you realize, I said evenly. She laughed, actually laughed, and shook her head in disbelief. Care? You don't even know what that word means, David. If I left tomorrow, you wouldn't survive a week without me. You'd be lost, like a little boy without his mother. It was the kind of statement designed to provoke, to cut deep, and for a moment, I let it sit there, hanging in the air between us. Is that what you think? I asked, my voice calm but firm. She didn't hesitate. That's exactly what I think. You're nothing without me, David. You'd fall apart if I wasn't here to keep everything together. I stood up then, meeting her gaze, and for the first time in a long time, I let her see the fire in my eyes. All right, I said simply. If that's how you feel, then I'll leave. She blinked, caught off guard. What? You said I wouldn't survive without you. Let's test that theory, I said, heading toward the bedroom to pack a bag. I could hear her sputtering behind me, trying to process what was happening. David, don't be ridiculous. You're not actually leaving. Stop being dramatic. But I didn't stop. I grabbed a small suitcase, threw in a few essentials, and walked back into the living room. Anna was standing there, arms still crossed, but her confidence was faltering. You're really doing this? Over a stupid argument? She asked, her voice rising. I zipped up the suitcase and looked at her. This isn't about an argument, Anna. This is about respect, or the lack of it. You've made it clear how you feel about me, and I think it's time I stop pretending it doesn't matter. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For once, she was speechless. I walked past her, suitcase in hand, and paused at the door. Take care, Anna, I said, and then I left. As I walked down the street, the cool night air hitting my face, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, freedom. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't running away. I was reclaiming myself. The morning after I left, I felt an odd mix of relief and apprehension. I had walked out of a marriage that had been eroding for years, and while I wasn't second-guessing my decision, I was curious to see how Anna would react. Would she apologize? Call me? Or would she let her pride dictate her response? Either way, I wasn't about to bend. That day, I decided to throw myself into work. I arrived at the office early, greeted my assistant, and dove into a mountain of tasks. For once, the office felt like a sanctuary, a place where I was respected, where people valued my contributions. It was a sharp contrast to the way Anna treated me, and it reaffirmed that leaving was the right choice. By mid-morning, the office buzzed with the usual energy. Meetings, emails, phone calls, it was business as usual. But things took a turn when my assistant, Sarah, popped her head into my office. David, there's been a slight commotion in the conference room, she said, her tone cautious. A commotion? I asked, looking up from my laptop. She nodded. Your wife, Anna, is here? I froze for a moment, processing her words. Anna was here? At my office? She'd never shown the slightest interest in my job before, so why now? What does she want? I asked, keeping my voice even. She's asking for you. Loudly, Sarah added with a hesitant smile. I sighed, standing up and straightening my tie. All right, let's see what this is about. When I entered the conference room, there she was, Anna, pacing back and forth with an air of frustration. The staff seated at the table looked visibly uncomfortable, unsure whether to intervene or leave. Anna, I said, stepping into the room. My tone was calm, professional. What are you doing here? Her head snapped toward me, and she immediately launched into a tirade. David, do you think you can just walk out on me and ignore me like this? Who do you think you are? The irony of her question wasn't lost on me. Anna, this is my workplace. If you have something to discuss, we can do it privately, I said, motioning for the staff to leave the room. Once the door closed, she turned to me, her frustration morphing into confusion. Why is everyone acting like you're in charge here? Because I am, I said simply, sitting down at the head of the table. She blinked, clearly not understanding. What are you talking about? You're not the boss. You've always said you're just an employee. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. I never said I wasn't the boss, Anna. You just assumed I wasn't. Her jaw dropped. Wait, you're the CEO? Of this company? I nodded. Yes, and have been for years. The room fell silent. Anna stared at me, trying to piece together the implications of what I just said. So all this time, you've been running this place? And you never told me? She finally asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. I didn't feel the need to, I replied. You've made it clear you don't respect me, so what difference would it have made? She opened her mouth to argue but stopped, her face flushing red. For the first time in years, Anna looked unsure of herself. I didn't mean, she started, but I cut her off. Anna, stop. You meant every word you've said to me over the years. You've treated me like I was beneath you, like I wasn't worthy of your respect. And now that you know who I really am, you're suddenly interested? It's too late for that. Her expression shifted from shock to desperation. David, I didn't know. If I had known, I wouldn't have. But you didn't know, I interrupted. And that's the point. Your respect for me should never have depended on my job title or my income. It should have been based on the person I am. She stared at me, speechless. For once, the roles were reversed. I was the one holding the power, and she was the one scrambling to keep up. I think we're done here, I said, standing up. Please don't come to my office again. If you want to talk, you can call. But I'm not interested in hearing apologies or excuses right now. I walked out of the conference room, leaving her standing there, stunned and silent. Back in my office, I sat down and took a deep breath. I had expected Anna to react poorly when I left, but I hadn't anticipated her storming into my workplace. Still, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. For years, she had underestimated me, belittled me, and now, the truth was out. I wasn't the passive, foolish husband she thought I was. I was the boss, and I had finally taken control of my life. After leaving Anna in the conference room, I expected her to process the revelation quietly, perhaps to retreat and figure out her next steps. I underestimated her desperation. By the time I returned to my office, my phone was already buzzing with her calls. I ignored each one, watching the notifications pile up without an ounce of guilt. For years, I had endured her sharp words, her dismissive tone, her complete lack of appreciation. Now, I could finally focus on myself without the weight of her negativity pressing down on me. But Anna? She wasn't about to give up that easily. It wasn't long before Sarah, my assistant, knocked on the door. She poked her head in, her expression a mixture of concern and amusement. David, she began cautiously, your wife is in the lobby. She's demanding to see you. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. What's she doing now? She's talking to the receptionist, asking why she wasn't informed about your position sooner, Sarah replied. I chuckled softly. She thinks she's entitled to that information? Sarah shrugged, clearly uncomfortable. Do you want me to call security? No need, I said, waving her off. Let her stew for a bit. She'll leave when she realizes I'm not coming down. An hour passed, and Anna's persistence only grew. My phone lit up with calls, her number flashing repeatedly across the screen. I ignored each one, letting them go to voicemail. Every once in a while, I'd glance at the messages she sent. David, we need to talk. I didn't mean what I said last night. Please call me. You're being childish. Come downstairs right now. David, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please, I need to see you. The desperation in her messages shifted from frustration to panic, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. For years, she had held the power in our relationship, always in control, always dictating how things would go. Now, the tables had turned. By lunchtime, Sarah returned to my office, looking hesitant. "David, she's still here," she said. I looked up from my computer. "In the lobby?" Sarah nodded. "She's sitting in one of the chairs, pacing every so often, and glaring at anyone who tries to talk to her. It's a little awkward." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "All right, let's see if she'll take the hint." I grabbed my jacket and headed for the back exit of the building, avoiding the lobby entirely. I wasn't interested in another confrontation, especially not at work. I had said everything I needed to say in that conference room. As I walked to a nearby cafe, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Anna. It was my lawyer. I answered, grateful for the distraction. "David, I've been reviewing the documents you sent over," he said. "Everything looks solid. If you're ready to move forward with the divorce, we can file as early as tomorrow." "Do it," I said without hesitation. "Are you sure? Sometimes emotions run high after big events like this. You might want to take a day or two to think about it," he advised. "I've been thinking about it for years," I replied. "I'm ready." After the call, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The decision was made. I was finally taking back control of my life, and nothing Anna said or did was going to change that. When I returned to the office, Sarah greeted me with a small smile. "She's gone," she said. "Finally," I muttered, heading back to my desk. But Anna's absence didn't mean the end of her attempts to reach me. That evening, as I sat in my quiet apartment, my phone buzzed with another call from her. I let it ring. Then came the messages. "David, please. We can work this out." I didn't mean what I said. I was just upset. "I love you, David. Don't throw everything away over one argument." I stared at the screen, shaking my head. If Anna had truly loved me, she would have respected me long before this moment. She wouldn't have waited until her pride was bruised to suddenly decide I was worth fighting for. I didn't respond. Not that night, and not the next day. Anna's desperation grew with each passing hour, but I stood firm. For years, I had been invisible in her eyes, just a foolish husband who couldn't survive without her. Now, she was learning the truth the hard way. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. By the third day, Anna's desperation had reached a fever pitch. My phone was a constant source of buzzing and ringing, calls, texts, voicemails, all from her. She was relentless, her messages swinging wildly between pleading, angry, and downright pitiful. I could almost predict the pattern. One minute, she'd beg for forgiveness, and the next, she'd lash out, blaming me for everything. "David, I know I said things I didn't mean. Please call me so we can talk. You're seriously ignoring me like a child? Grow up and face me." "I'm sorry. I'll do better. I'll change. Just come home, please." I read every message without responding. Not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't allow myself to be dragged back into the toxic cycle. Anna wasn't apologizing because she truly understood what she'd done wrong. She was panicking because she'd lost control, and she couldn't handle it. Work became my sanctuary during this time. In the office, I was respected, valued, and most importantly, in charge. My team had no idea what was happening in my personal life, and I intended to keep it that way. Professionalism was my armor, and I wore it well. But Anna wasn't content to let me have peace. She started showing up at places she thought I'd be. My favorite coffee shop, the park I often walked through during lunch breaks, even the building lobby. Each time, she tried to catch my attention, waving or calling my name. And each time, I walked away without acknowledging her. One afternoon, Sarah intercepted me before I could leave for a meeting. "David," she said hesitantly, "Anna's downstairs again. She's asking to see you." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "What is she doing this time?" "She says it's urgent." "She looks upset," Sarah said carefully. I leaned back in my chair, considering my options. Tell her I'm unavailable. If she needs to talk, she can send an email. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Got it." When I returned from my meeting, Sarah informed me that Anna had finally left, but not before causing a scene in the lobby. Apparently, she had yelled at the receptionist, accusing her of hiding me and threatening to report this whole company. The staff were professional enough not to mention it directly, but I could feel the tension in the air. Anna's behavior wasn't just embarrassing, it was disruptive. That evening, I found myself scrolling through her messages again. One in particular stood out. "I'm scared, David. I don't know what to do without you. Please come back." For a brief moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. We had been married for years, after all, and no matter how toxic things had become, it was hard to erase the good memories completely. But then I remembered the countless times she had dismissed me, belittled me, made me feel like I was nothing. I couldn't go back to that. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, my lawyer called with an update. "David, we've officially filed the divorce papers. Anna will be served within the week," he said. "Good," I replied. "And just a heads up, if she contests it, things might get messy," he added. "I'm prepared for that," I said firmly. But I wasn't entirely prepared for what came next. Later that day, Anna showed up at my apartment unannounced. I heard the knocking first, loud and insistent, followed by her voice calling my name. "David, open the door. Please, I just want to talk." I sat on the couch, staring at the door, unmoving. I wasn't going to let her in. "David, I know you're in there. Your car is outside," she shouted. I remained silent. After a few minutes, her tone changed. "You're really not going to open the door? After everything we've been through?" Still, I said nothing. Eventually, the knocking stopped, and I heard her footsteps retreating. I peeked through the peephole and saw her sitting on the steps, her head in her hands. She stayed there for nearly an hour before finally leaving. The guilt tried to creep in, but I pushed it away. I wasn't ignoring her out of spite. I was protecting myself. I had given Anna years of my life, years of patience and understanding, and she had thrown it all away. Now it was time for me to take care of myself. That night, I turned off my phone, locked the door, and poured myself a glass of wine. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. Anna could panic all she wanted, but I wasn't going to let her pull me back into her web. This was my life now, free, independent, and finally in control. By the time Anna was served with the divorce papers, I had already prepared myself for the inevitable fallout. I knew she wouldn't take it well. Her pride wouldn't let her. Still, I hoped she'd find some semblance of reason and accept the situation with grace. But, as always, Anna didn't disappoint in proving me wrong. The calls started almost immediately after she was served. At first, they were angry, filled with accusations and blame. "You're doing this to humiliate me, aren't you? You're such a coward, David, hiding behind lawyers instead of facing me like a man. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me?" I ignored each message, my resolve unwavering. After a few days, the tone of her calls shifted. The anger was replaced with desperation, then pleading. "David, please, we can fix this. I'll change, I promise. Don't throw away everything we've built. Think about us. You still love me, don't you? Tell me you do, and we'll figure this out." But I knew better. Anna wasn't sorry for how she had treated me. She was sorry for losing the control she thought she had over me. Her pleas weren't about love or reconciliation. They were about fear of losing the life she had built on the foundation of my silence and patience. One evening, she managed to get through to me before I could decline the call. Her voice was shaky, laced with a mixture of anger and sadness. "David, how could you do this? Divorce? Really? We've been married for years. Are you really going to let it all end like this?" I took a deep breath, keeping my tone calm. "Anna, it's already ended. It ended the moment you decided I wasn't worth your respect. This isn't something I decided overnight. It's been a long time coming." "You're overreacting," she exclaimed. "Every couple fights, every marriage has its rough patches. You don't just quit when things get hard." "This isn't about rough patches, Anna. This is about the way you've treated me for years. You called me a foolish husband who couldn't survive without you. You've belittled me, dismissed me, and never once saw me as your equal. I'm done being invisible in my own marriage." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, almost defeated. "I didn't mean those things, David. I was just frustrated." "I know you didn't mean them," I replied. "That's the problem. They weren't calculated. They were how you really felt. And now, I'm choosing to walk away." "David, please," she started, but I cut her off. "Anna, this conversation is over. The papers have been filed. I wish you well, but this is the end." I hung up before she could respond, my heart heavy but resolute. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, reflecting on everything. The years of quiet suffering, the countless moments of disrespect, the love I had once felt for a woman who no longer existed. It all weighed on me. But beneath the sadness was a sense of liberation. For the first time in years, I was taking control of my life. Over the next few days, Anna's messages became less frequent. She seemed to realize I wasn't going to budge, and her desperation slowly gave way to silence. My lawyer informed me that she hadn't contested the divorce, which was a relief. I had braced myself for a fight, but it seemed Anna had finally accepted the inevitable. One day, I received a final text from her. "I don't know if you'll read this, but I want you to know I'm sorry. For everything. I wish things could have been different. Goodbye, David." I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. From that moment on, I focused entirely on rebuilding my life. My career flourished as I poured my energy into the company, and I began to rediscover parts of myself that had been buried under years of unhappiness. The decision to divorce Anna wasn't easy, but it was necessary. It was a choice that allowed me to reclaim my self-worth and prioritize my own happiness. And for that, I felt no regret. When the divorce was finalized, it felt like I had stepped out of a storm and into clear skies. The weight that had been pressing down on my shoulders for years was gone. It wasn't just about ending the marriage. It was about reclaiming my life, my peace, and my sense of self-worth. I moved back into my work with a renewed focus, pouring my energy into the company. The office became my refuge, a place where I was respected and valued for my leadership and decisions. My team noticed the change in me. "You seem lighter," my assistant Sarah said one day, smiling as she placed some files on my desk. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up." I didn't tell her about the divorce. It wasn't her business, and frankly, it didn't define me. But she was right. I did feel lighter, freer. I was no longer walking on eggshells at home or dreading the next argument. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. My evenings were quieter now, but they were mine. I started picking up old hobbies that I'd abandoned during my marriage. I dusted off my guitar, something I hadn't played since college, and spent hours relearning old songs. I went for long walks, enjoying the peace and solitude. I even started cooking for myself, experimenting with recipes instead of just throwing something together to avoid Anna's complaints. I also reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years. During my marriage, I drifted away from them, partly because of Anna's controlling nature and partly because I was too exhausted to maintain those relationships. But now, I had the time and energy to rekindle those connections. One evening, I met up with my old college friend, Mike, for dinner. He had been one of the few people who had expressed concern about my marriage early on. "So, it's over?" Mike asked after I filled him in. "Yeah, it's over," I said, taking a sip of my drink. He nodded thoughtfully. "I'm not going to say I told you so, but I told you so." I laughed. "Yeah, you did. And I should have listened sooner." "But you're free now," he said, raising his glass. "Here's to new beginnings." "To new beginnings," I agreed, clinking my glass against his. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. As time went on, I realized how much I had lost during my marriage. Not just my sense of independence, but also my confidence and joy. Slowly, I began to rebuild those parts of myself, but perhaps the biggest transformation was internal. I no longer felt the need to prove myself to anyone. I wasn't the quiet, foolish husband Anna had painted me as. I was a leader, a decision-maker, and a man who had reclaimed his life. One day, as I was reviewing some company plans in my office, Sarah walked in with a stack of documents. She placed them on my desk, then hesitated. "Something on your mind, Sarah?" I asked, looking up. She smiled. Not really. It's nice to see you like this. You seem happier. I nodded. I am happier. She nodded back, satisfied, and left the room. Her words stayed with me. I was happier. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living for myself instead of bending to someone else's expectations. Every now and then, I thought about Anna, not with anger or bitterness, but with a sense of closure. I hoped she had found peace in her own way, just as I had. But I knew one thing for certain. I didn't miss her. This was my life now, a life I had rebuilt on my own terms, and I was finally at peace with that. I thought about Anna less and less as time passed. My days were full. Work kept me busy, old hobbies filled my evenings, and reconnecting with friends gave me the social life I'd sorely missed during my marriage. But then, one day, I heard from someone unexpected. My assistant Sarah knocked on my office door with an uncertain expression. "David, there's someone here to see you." She didn't have an appointment, but she said it's urgent. "Who is it?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "Anna," Sarah said hesitantly. I sat back in my chair, momentarily at a loss. It had been months since I'd last spoken to her, and I wasn't eager to change that. Still, curiosity got the better of me. "Send her in," I said, though my voice betrayed none of the unease I felt. When Anna walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked different, frazzled, thinner, like she hadn't slept in days. Her once proud posture was gone, replaced by a hesitance I'd never seen in her before. "David," she said softly, her eyes scanning the room. I nodded toward a chair across from me. "Have a seat." She sat down, fidgeting with the strap of her handbag. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she took a deep breath and said, "I know I'm the last person you want to see, but I needed to talk to you." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "What's on your mind, Anna?" She hesitated, as though trying to find the right words. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. "I didn't realize how much I was hurting you until you were gone," she said, her voice trembling. "You didn't deserve the way I treated you. I was selfish, and I took you for granted." Her words were unexpected, but they didn't have the impact she might have hoped for. I'd spent too many years waiting for an apology like this, only to realize that it wouldn't change anything. "Why now?" I asked, my tone calm but firm. She blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean? Why are you apologizing now? Because you feel guilty? Or because you realized what you lost?" Her face fell, and I saw the truth written all over it. She wasn't here because she had suddenly grown a conscience. She was here because she was struggling without me. "I don't know how to answer that," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "That's what I thought." "David, I'm trying," she said, her tone growing desperate. "I want to make things right. I want us to try again." I shook my head. "Anna, there's no going back. What we had, it's gone. You destroyed it, piece by piece, every time you dismissed me, insulted me, and treated me like I was less than you." Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy, but it wasn't enough to change my mind. "I've moved on," I continued. "I'm happy now, Anna. Happier than I've been in years. I'm not going to jeopardize that by going back to a relationship that drained the life out of me." Her tears began to fall, but she didn't argue. Instead, she nodded slowly, as if she'd finally accepted the truth. "I understand," she said, her voice shaky. I wanted you to know that I regret everything. And I'm sorry." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Thank you for saying that." She stood up, clutching her handbag tightly. "I won't bother you again, David. I promise." I watched as she walked out of my office, her shoulders slumped, her head down. And for the first time, I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not pity. Just nothing. Anna's regret came too late, but it didn't matter. I had already moved on. That evening, as I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, I thought about how far I'd come. My life was my own now, free from the weight of a toxic relationship. Anna's regret was hers to carry, not mine. I smiled to myself, the cool night air brushing against my face. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace. Weeks after Anna's visit to my office, I thought I had seen the last of her. My life had settled into a rhythm of peace and productivity, and I was fully focused on the future. Then, out of nowhere, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name written in neat, familiar handwriting. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside was a short, handwritten note. David, I know you've moved on, and I respect that. But there's something you need to know about our time together. I made mistakes, and one of them was keeping a secret that I thought would protect us both. It's not my place to carry it anymore. You deserve the truth. Check the enclosed envelope. I hope it gives you closure. Hannah. At first, I dismissed it as another attempt to pull me back into her web of manipulation. But then I saw the smaller envelope tucked inside, sealed and marked with my initials. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside was a hospital document. My eyes scanned the words, and my breath caught in my throat. Under my name was a declaration I never expected to see: 99.9% match father. My hands trembled as I read the rest of the document, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't Martin's name on the form. It was someone else's. A child I didn't know existed. The date on the form matched the early years of our marriage, a time when I had been too buried in work to notice much else. My mind raced, piecing together fragments of conversations and moments I had dismissed as inconsequential. Had Anna hidden a pregnancy from me? Had she given up the child without telling me? I called my lawyer immediately, forwarding the document and asking for an investigation. Days later, the truth came to light. Anna had been pregnant in the first year of our marriage. But the child wasn't missing. They had been placed for adoption, a decision Anna had made without consulting me. When confronted, Anna admitted everything. "I thought you wouldn't want the responsibility," she said over the phone, her voice hollow. "I thought I was doing what was best for both of us. But I see now I was wrong." The revelation left me shaken but resolute. Anna's choices had robbed me of something precious, but they also reinforced the truth I had come to accept. She and I had never been partners. I decided to track down the child, not to disrupt their life, but to ensure they knew the truth about where they came from. It wasn't closure I had sought, but in uncovering this final secret, I found a deeper purpose. Sometimes, the end of one story is the beginning of another, and this one, it was mine to write.